Well, we have our guest in. We have Miss Calvin Daffer. How's it going? Thank you for joining. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I'm sorry I'm a little bit late, but I really appreciate the invitation and meeting your audience here.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, no problem. I understand things happen. And so I'm just glad that we could sit down and talk. I've been a fan of yours. I've seen you on News Nation a couple of times and some other channels talking about a few of the cases that I follow. It seems we have quite a bit of the similar thinking and when it comes to those cases. And I have, me and my audience, I'm sure, have a few questions for you as far as the FBI's involvement, and no better person, I think, than somebody who was formerly of the FBI to answer those questions. So thank you for joining us.
Absolutely. Who couldn't join a drunk turkey?
There you go. Right, exactly. That's what I said. Well, again, thank you so much for joining. And just to kind of get into it, there's a couple of documents that were just dropped, some huge explosive stuff. I was just talking with the audience about how, Amazon and it seems like he purchased the knife. It sure does look like they have a receipt there from Amazon and a delivery to his house. And I believe maybe a name on a credit card. How big is that? How explosive is that type of evidence in a case like this?
It's really huge, especially considering that they don't have the murder weapon. They don't have that K-bar knife, but now they're going to be able to link the K-bar knife directly to their main suspect. And remember, I don't know if you saw the Dateline special, but Dateline actually broke this story over a year ago. That Amazon indeed sold that knife. And we sort of knew that because the search warrant was very targeted and specifically talked about 3 K-bar knives and, of course, being linked to Bryan Kohberger. So not a huge surprise, but it's great to actually see it in the court documents.
Yeah, 100%. And I remember that. And I was explaining to my audience there that purchase was supposedly in April of 2022. Now, at that point, we know that he had an interview for the Pullman Police Department for their intern police position. There's an April 3rd, I want to say, somewhere around there, 2022 email that's going back and forth there. I strongly suspect that he was turned down not just once, but twice as an intern police officer for the department. Once then, and then again in the fall. Do you think that could have had any implication as to the purchase and perhaps maybe an idea of maybe why he committed this crime?
Well, I think that it just added on to his frustration of not being able to accomplish a lot of goals he wanted to accomplish. I think he really wanted to be in the police department. I still don't think he would have been able to overcome his demons again if he's the one responsible for these crimes. But I definitely think that this was part of the turning point, one of those straws on the back of the camel's back.
Oh, sure. Yeah, 100%. Plus then you add in the problems that he was having at WSU, the problems he was having with his professor and other students and him losing his job. I see a world in Bryan Kohberger's mind falling and collapsing, everything that he had worked so hard to overcome and do just crumble at his feet there and him turn to the dark side. And there's a lot of information there. There's a little bit there that's a little bit concerning too. There's some DNA underneath the fingernails of one of the victims, and according to the defense, they can exclude Bryan Kohberger. Is that concerning to you?
Well, first of all, I don't have that same read on that document. Okay. But I understand why you do, and it actually says that at the very end of the document about Correct. Being exculpatory. But if you look at it, I think the reason some people are saying, well, this is exculpatory. And in fact, the prosecution, when they brought this information to the grand jury, said, well, listen, we brought this to show, exculpatory evidence, if you will, to show both sides of it for their consideration. This is the problem. It's exculpatory in that it isn't 100% conclusive, like the DNA on the snap on the sheath, right? So the point is, if it's not 100% conclusive, then they're considering it exculpatory. But this is the rub. Statistically speaking, there is some stat, some number that shows it is him. And that's what we see in black on those documents. And that's why they're saying, listen, we want that out because we don't even want it to say 5% could be Bryan Kohberger, right? Mm-hmm. So I think this really helps the prosecution, and I think the defense knows it does too. If the defense didn't think it or thought it helped them, they wouldn't be fighting to exclude it. So I think it's clear that this really hurts the defense's case, even though they're trying to categorize it as exculpatory.
Yeah, that was one of the things that I was saying. I was like, I'm not a scientist. I was telling my guys here, I was like, I'm not a scientist. I'm not going to try to jump into any of these things. What I know is that there must be a reason they want it out. And if it's showing that it's exculpatory and it's not him, why throw it out? There's got to be a reason. There's stuff that's blacked out here. I'd like to see the response from the state. I want to see what the blacked out stuff is before I make my decision on whether or not it is in fact his or not. But yeah, at the end of one of the documents, the defense sure does try to make it seem like it's exculpatory, but they've made a lot of things try to seem exculpatory that weren't so. But we hear a couple of things and we find out a couple of things. First, the 8 hours that it took for somebody to call 911. It seems that Dylan had night terrors or nightmares and lucid dreams and some issues there. Do you still see that as going to be, how important is that going to be for this case, that 8 hour missing gap?
I think it's important. I think, it makes Dylan and Bethany and all the other kids that came to that house sometime before the 8 hour period. It just looks so bad. But particularly on Dylan, since she actually saw him. Mm-hmm. But this is the thing. It's easy to sit back here and judge her reaction. She's a young girl, really. Mm-hmm. Traumatized, I think, influenced, obviously, by what she had drank the night before. And you put that all together, and it makes sense to me that she passed out and slept a great deal of that time. The big thing I think is that she's not a huge part of this case. She was huge in helping the prosecution, or I shouldn't say the prosecution, the police know early on that they were looking for a male, as an example, not a female. Mm-hmm. She was huge for, knowing that it wasn't somebody really short, that it was somebody taller. General stature, also the kind of clothing he wore. All of that, I think, was really important. But in the big scheme of things, when you're talking the DNA, the vehicle, the digital evidence we're going to have, the K-bar knife, where it was purchased, her seeing somebody, I think, is going to be minimal compared to everything else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I thought more so than anything, I thought the timeline in which when the perpetrator was inside the house, I thought that was mainly the importance of her testimony, and to make sure that who she saw doesn't exclude Bryan Kohberger. Nothing that she has mentioned says that it was somebody else. Nothing. She's not talking about somebody shorter, thick, Hispanic or African American. It's all down the line, although vague, still does not exclude him. 7 weeks, though. It took 7 weeks to arrest Bryan Kohberger. A lot of people look at that and looked at the failures of the police department and the department there. I thought it was fairly quick. I was like, man, they had a guy who was a PhD, who ended up being a PhD student in criminology, who knew his ways in and out of law enforcement and their techniques. Did a lot to mask himself, and yet they caught him in 7 weeks. How long do you think it took before the FBI was called in that 7 week span?
Oh, they were called right away. I believe they were called within the first, 24 hours. Mm-hmm. There were 60 plus agents assigned very early on in that case. Also state police. They were very wise, I think, to get the Bureau involved and the state police involved post haste. And honestly, 7 weeks is nothing. You look at how long it took for them to get BTK, bind, torture, and kill Dennis Rader. Years, decades. And other people, Zodiac never caught. Jack the Ripper maybe just now identified after decades and decades. So this was really well done because he wasn't known to the victims. Anytime you have a random person like this, it makes things so much tougher because you got to get rid of the inner circle, the medium circle, then the outside circles. And then they were at the point of, wait a minute, this isn't anybody in the close inner circle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I agree. I 100% agree. You find out that Bryan Kohberger, though, he's from Pullman, or he's living in Pullman. He attends Washington State University. The victims are in Moscow. There's Idaho. There's a difference there. There's Washington. There's Idaho. how did this stay a local state case and not a federal case, in your opinion?
Such a great question, because he did cross state lines. We've recently seen with Luigi Mangione, right? I mean, many of us were screaming it. I'm like, this has got to be taken on by the Bureau. And finally, they came forward and prosecuted Luigi. But the reason this wasn't, I believe, is because venue really does lie squarely in Moscow. And they were the lead from the beginning, even though I always argued that the FBI, even though somebody's the lead, when you're handling the digital piece, or you're handling the laboratory piece, or the interviewing piece, you're really doing what you need to do without being told what you need to do by somebody in Moscow with 2 years in, right? I think the Bureau was very much the mentor in this case. But venue lied squarely in Moscow. And I think it was proper to keep it there.
You think there was ever maybe a disagreement between local law enforcement and FBI as far as jurisdiction of who should get it? We've had Howard Bloom on. I'm not sure if you're familiar, but he wrote a book referencing Idaho and the murders, and he had a couple of sources that he claims are in the FBI that are in the area that are close to the case, maybe FBI, maybe law enforcement, but that there may have been, like, for instance, a moment where the FBI had Bryan Kohberger's name and didn't hand it off to local law enforcement right away. Does that surprise you if that may have happened?
I doubt if that really happened in that way that was characterized by Mr. Bloom, and I know who he is. And we've actually we agree on a lot when it comes to, as an example, Maddy Mogen being the main target, and a lot of other things. But I disagree with that. It is really hard to explain in these gigantic cases, multi-agency cases with literally 100+ people working it, the flow of information and how difficult it is, even with, programs like Orion and other databases, to try to focus everybody in to manage a case like this. So I could see where, yes, analysts and others might have had the name Bryan Kohberger, and it took a while to get that down because there were so many other names being discussed. But I don't think it would have been anything nefarious. They seem to work really closely on this case. And I also don't think the Bureau would have wanted to swoop in there and just take the case. It was really, in a lot of ways, different than like a Luigi Mangione, where he went to multiple states, and he just came into New York strictly to commit the crime. He wasn't from there. Moscow, those kids were from there. He was from Pullman, that local area. And I think they made the right call here.
Yeah, I agree. I do. Is there, let's just say this doesn't fall through, like, is there a federal case that can be done still with Bryan Kohberger?
Oh, yes. Let's just say this prosecution fails for some reason and he's acquitted. Certainly the FBI could file a case. It's not double jeopardy, completely different statute. And so they could file.
Good deal. Yeah, no, that was one of the things I was wondering about as well. One of the things that captured Bryan Kohberger, which has come out, is the IgG. And one of the biggest conspiracy is that the FBI utilized a couple of databases maybe they shouldn't have. What are your thoughts on that? And do you think that's something that is common?
Maybe, right. So that maybe they shouldn't have, right? That's even kind of the language and everything we're hearing, that, maybe they shouldn't have. This was a quadruple murder. And these databases, Bryan Kohberger wasn't even in these databases. So it's being alleged, by his team, that his right to privacy was somehow, betrayed, and that was one of their legal premises. And then, of course, now, as you're mentioning, well, these databases should have never been looked into, even though they had the proper warrant information, warrant that was served to bridge that. I just can't disagree more. I mean, these are guidelines, and as long as you have proper legal authority, if otherwise you wouldn't have got into that, there's no reason not to be able to see that information. And there's disclaimers and everything else when people submit their DNA to see, what their background is. And this was a quadruple murder. So I think they crossed every T and dotted every I, but certainly routinely, you shouldn't be looking in there without stress.
Right. Yeah. And, that was one of my arguments. My arguments about the IGG this entire time was, I get it, but at the end of the day, it was a tip. There's nothing that's been used. Like, the arrest warrant doesn't have the mentioning of the IGG, the warrants for his vehicle, his person, none of those things mention the IGG, none of the warrants for his AT&T, nothing. And, I get it. It's a tip. I'm not sure if you're familiar with who I am, but I'm an ex-police officer myself. I've gotten tips when I was in law enforcement. And so I try to explain, like, there's more than one way to skin a cat when it comes to a case. Just because you have information, it doesn't matter. It's not what you know, it's what you can prove. And in that scenario, and in this scenario here, just because they had his name, they still had to build a case. And I think that although it was, I was a little bit worried. I'll be honest. I thought it was a little bit vague, the stuff in the PCA, but they talk about these GPS locations, and we'll get into that right now. How important is that going to be? Because, when I was an officer, this was several, over 10 years ago, and GPS coordinates, that was a big thing. But I thought, triangulation was a big thing. But I thought nowadays they use GPS and a bunch of other stuff. Why are we still going back to this whole pinpointing stuff? What's going on with that? What is your opinion, if you don't mind?
Well, a couple of things, and that is that in different areas, there's different possibilities in terms of digital analysis, right? This is Idaho, Moscow, Idaho, very rural, and they are using triangulation because that's what they have to deal with in terms of phone towers. So that does make a lot of sense to me, but I do have it on good authority. There's going to be so much more. It's really just the tip of the iceberg in terms of the digital information, Google searches, activity that was done by Bryan Kohberger on his cell phone and on his devices. And I believe it's going to be very interesting when they really cut through everything they have. It's going to be big.
I 100% agree with you. I do have also heard some of the similar things. I'm sure you've heard a lot more than me, though. But even with the things that we do know, I think it's pretty compelling. I'm curious, though. Have you heard about the Andrew Garrett discovery? This was some information that was put out there by Forensic Frenzies channel, referencing Bryan Kohberger and potential connection with him online to the victims.
Okay, so I know about the potential of Maddie and Kaylee being connected on social media. Is that what you're referring to, though? Because I am not familiar with this channel.
Okay. So Andrew Garrett, he was a person apparently who was contacted by the defense to look into Bryan Kohberger's phone pings. They ended up going with Cy Ray, but they initially had contacted Andrew Garrett. I think he was somebody that ended up being a little bit too expensive. He has some sort of technology that he was able to run Bryan Kohberger's social medias and find a connection between Bryan Kohberger and a couple of the victims through what I suspect is Instagram. And, this has gone out, but, the prosecution says that there's no evidence of stalking. I was just kind of curious if you had ever heard of the Andrew Garrett documents or the fact that that Bryan Kohberger may have been following a couple of the victims online.
I definitely am aware of the connection on Instagram with Maddie and Kaylee.
Uh-huh.
I want to see what they produce when it comes to trial in this regard. But, you're a former law enforcement. I see the sticking point between stalking and surveilling, different words. And that's, I think, what the prosecution is trying to say. As you know, stalking is totally different. Stalking, you want them to know you're stalking them. You call them, they see you in the distance. You're actually terrorizing them by stalking them. That isn't what Bryan Kohberger was doing. And I think that's the difference with the verbiage that the prosecution wants to make clear. I think he was definitely surveilling them, doing site surveys, seeing when they came, when they left. That's why we have those 12 different times that he was over in that location. I think that's why we might have this Instagram nexus. Not that he was stalking them or bothering them or pinging them, reaching out to them in any way like a stalker would do. but rather more of a surveillance. That's how I see it.
Makes sense. I didn't think about that, the surveillance aspect. They did come out early on in the investigation and said that the house may have been the target. And if you're, watching the house, and that would be surveilling, not necessarily stalking, I'd assume. But that is an excellent point there. Howard Bloom mentioned some other things, and I'm just kind of curious if you've heard this at all. But he had broke it on our channel that Bryan Kohberger may be investigated for breaking into the chem lab at WSU, and that they were investigating him for that, and potentially he was making a bomb. Have you heard any of these rumors or anything like that?
I have not heard that. I've never seen that substantiated anywhere. But I will say, good journalists in mainstream media and in publication media, I truly believe that they have amazing sources oftentimes. It always doesn't surprise me, just like you had sources as an officer. The FBI is required. When I left, we had to have 3 sources that were giving good information. In other words, that we could run down that information and try to corroborate it and work cases, right? So we were graded on that. So informants were such a huge part of receiving an outstanding, which is the top level that you can receive as an FBI agent on your evaluation. So you wanted to be outstanding, and there were 3 areas. And then if you had any extracurricular, like I was SWAT, so then you're also graded on SWAT, separate from your investigative duties. So I guess my point is that Bloom could have a good source that he has paid and that is providing information. I'm always very careful. As you know, you have to be very careful with sources. I don't even ever mention any sources or my sources. I never talk about them because I just think it does a disservice. If I have information that I know because of a source, I either don't mention the information or I just mention it nebulously as if it didn't come from anywhere. So I guess what I'm saying, I think it's possible this could be true based on him possibly having good sources, but I have never seen that substantiated anywhere.
Good deal. Good deal. Yeah, I heard that there may have been some sort of usage with WSU equipment. I always thought it was the radios and the dispatch stuff. For me, he was a smart guy, obviously. I mean, he was a PhD student. He's not stupid. And he did some things that I felt were against the grain, so to speak, of what you would have expected of a typical person that would have committed this crime. Like, for instance, according to the PCA, after that 9:30 a.m. Time that he drove out there and then went back, he never visited the area again, which is not typical from somebody who you would that committed a crime like this. You would have suspected them to revisit the crime more often. Some of the other things that he had done, that if he wasn't willing to go back those other times, what made him go back that one time? Well, obviously there's nothing in the news. There's nothing going on, but yet he should have known that those bodies in that crime scene could have been discovered at any point. And so he was really taking a risk going back out there to that residence. Now, he couldn't search up on Google, Moscow murders, because then that's going to be pretty obvious if they end up suspecting him. He's Google searching things before the crime scene is found. So he had to make that drive out there. But like, as I said, at any point that scene could have been discovered. Cameras could have been set up. Just because the media doesn't know about it doesn't mean that the scene's not discovered. And I thought that if he was taking that big of a risk, he may have had some sort of radio or whatnot. I know that 911 in that area went through Pullman Police. I know that also was the same case for the Washington State University Police Department. They were on the same, I guess, radio frequencies. I thought that's what that chem lab break-in had to do with. What are your thoughts on him returning just that one time? Or do you think maybe he did return, it's just his phone was off those other times?
So I think he returned exactly what you pointed out in part. And that was, why in the world isn't this the biggest news? A guy like this, somebody who commits this crime, they want to be front and center. They want to be, even though they're in the shadows per se, but they wanted this crime. He wanted this crime to be the biggest thing ever. And for him to turn on the news and repeatedly see for hours, remember this happened, as you know, 4:30 in the morning. Why in the world isn't there any news? So I think that really bothered him. The other thing was that knife sheath.
Mm-hmm.
His heart had to completely stop, thinking, oh my gosh, I left that knife sheath. And I wondered if he thought maybe when he exited, it fell on the ground. And maybe he could go and look, especially when he saw there was no police presence there. And then finally, I will say that I think people who commit crimes like this, they truly, they have a narcissistic, I'm not saying that as a criminal psychiatrist. I'm saying that as what we all see with people who commit crimes like this and other crimes. They think they're smarter. They think they're faster. They think they have it all figured out. And they really just don't think they're going to get caught. And I think that also weighed into his decision to go back.
You think he's going to take the stand?
I do not think he'll take the stand.
Yeah, I don't think so either. When they go into the fact that they're going to have an expert testify that he could have purchased, or somebody could have purchased the K-bar knife from the house due to the AI from the Amazon, that told me he's not going to be the one that's going to go up there and say he didn't purchase it. If they're using some sort of expert, it's not going to be him. He ain't testifying. So I don't think so either. Some of the arguments that the defense has is that, well, one, there's a couple of bits of blood and DNA evidence that don't belong to Kohberger. One is on a handrail that's on the first floor to the second floor staircase, and one's on a glove outside. How big of a hurdle do you think those two things are going to be?
I don't think they're going to be big at all. First of all, the glove, as you probably, I'm sorry if you've discussed this and I go over it again, but
that's okay.
That glove was found many days after the crime. Actually, it was, I want to say on November 27th, I believe it was found, Thanksgiving-ish. And that was weeks after this crime was committed. And that was found after the crime scene was cleared. It was barely inside of that tape, right where the trash cans were. Mm-hmm. And as anybody who grew up in cold weather, which I did, Nebraska, Kansas, you're always losing your gloves. You have them in your pockets. You have more than one. It's just not rare at all to see a glove on the ground. These gloves also weren't like nitrile gloves. These were workman gloves or glove. It was one single glove. And I truly believe that was somebody of all the people that in 2 weeks had passed by 1122 King Road to look at it, to gawk, maybe something to do with that trash can, a trash hauler. I sure do wish somebody would come forward and say, oh man, I was over there and I lost my glove right on that curtilage. So I don't think that's going to be a problem. As far as the railing, I mean, everybody who's followed this case knows that there were so many people inside of that house, people that nobody ever knew were in there. In other words, Maddie, Kaylee, Xana, sometimes they weren't even there when parties were going on, right? Mm-hmm. This was party central. And it's shocking to me that there wasn't more unidentified DNA. I don't know about you, but I have issues with hangnails. I have them a lot. And, for people to, it's not even anywhere near the bodies and you have your hands on that hand railing. So any sort of paper cut or cut at any time, years, that could have been there.
Yeah.
So I give very, very little weight to it as being important.
Yeah, me too. I think that's the main reason why they chose the DNA on the sheath, and the reason why they ran that versus any other the DNA as far as the IgG stuff or focus in on it, at least, because the pictures from the crime scene that you can see when you can see inside the house, it shows a remnants of a party. Yet everybody in that neighborhood said that there wasn't a party that night. So that remnants of that party was from a night, even maybe the night before that, if not the night before that. And so how many people had gone in and out in that time? They hadn't cleaned it since then. The one thing that was brought in was the sheath, and it has Bryan Kohberger's DNA on it, which is huge. It's definitely huge. Do you think he's going to take a plea? Do you think, I know there's a few defense attorneys that have been speaking about some of the mitigation things that have gone on, the autism, the those type of disclosures that maybe perhaps they're setting up for some sort of plea deal? Do you think that could be on the horizon?
Well, in Idaho, my understanding is the only thing that any sort of mental capacity deficiency, which I don't even think autism necessarily falls under that, but it can only be used to mitigate sentencing. It can't be used to mitigate committing a crime. So it can't be allowed in trial. I think it could be allowed later. That's my understanding. Could it be introduced in some way? Yes, but it can't be a defense, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So, if I were Ann Taylor, but remember, Ann Taylor is making money hand over fist. I went over her salary and her increased salary and what this means to her from a financial and then also from a career point of view.
Oh, yeah.
This is huge. I don't think she has any interest in pleading this out. That's my opinion. I'll die on the cross that she still shouldn't have even been the attorney on this case, based on the fact that her office represented Xana Kernodle's mother as well as Maddie Mogen's father, because that doesn't happen, in the federal system. But nevertheless, I guess my point is for this, I would plea him in a New York minute and save him from the death penalty. That would be my play as a defense attorney. But I think there's a lot of things working against that.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not sure he's going to want to do it either. I think he thinks he can beat this. I mean, that's what he's been saying since the beginning, is that he's going to go out there and beat this. One of the things a lot of people have said about this case, one of the theories and the rumors, and I wanted to get your opinion. Your background is in gangs and also like cartels and stuff like that, correct?
Yes.
Did you ever think that played a role in this case?
No.
Yeah, neither did I.
Absolutely not. And by the way, I loved your last point about Bryan Kohberger fighting. I think it's such an excellent point that whether it's in his best interest or not, I agree that his personality seems to be that way. Even from that traffic stop, we saw everything he went to get out of a ticket that he didn't even get. Right? Do you remember that? It was just on and on. But back to your point, there was no part of me. This is a party house with kids that are drinking and maybe smoking some marijuana. This was not a house where they were doing, a drug trade was running out of there. I thought it was so far-fetched to try to bring in Xana Kernodle's mom and her, really she's a addict. She's some huge drug dealer. I thought all of that was so in left field, and no part of me thought this was any part of a gang hit. I've seen gang hits that they're not picking on students in Idaho at a party house. No.
Where I was in law enforcement, I'm in Texas, so we deal with a lot of cartel stuff close to the border. And when a cartel hits, there's a message, and the message is clear. It's not a who done it type of thing. Everybody knows. Around the time that this had occurred, I want to say maybe a month after, sometime in December or January, there was another slaying in California. Police immediately came forward saying, yeah, this quadruple homicide here in California is cartel related. They had information. Those things are obvious. It's not a surprise. It's not a whodunit. It's not none of this type of stuff. So 100%. I never thought it was. I'm glad I could bring you on. I wanted to ask you that question too, so we can get that out there as well. What about the stops out there in Indiana? You think the FBI had anything involved with that?
So initially, I really thought that was orchestrated, having done stops exactly like that. You want the locals to do it, even when it came to taking down drug loads. We always orchestrated that and had, a local state police pull the car over, and we were sitting in the car behind, straightening it. But I 100% believe in this case, they were running interdiction. Basically, as you know, and your audience may know, that's where you literally have a day and you have interdiction agents and officers that are looking for essentially out of state tags, and you just pull them over and you're just trying to interdict stuff. And I say that because for two reasons. One, there were two stops done so close to one another that partially told me this was set up to do that. And then secondly, and I think it was truthful, the FBI came out and was dogmatic that no, they did not order this. They did not orchestrate it. And so while it looked really fishy, even to, me, former bureau, I was like, oh, okay, wait a minute. But then there was that second one, and there would never be any reason to do two. You would only do one to identify who all was in the car, to see what all they might say. That's your reasoning. You would never do it twice. So then I said, oh, okay, this is an interdiction deal within this range, and they're going to pull over anybody with out-of-state tags.
Yeah. For the same offense too. It's you can't.
Oh, no.
And I've been a part of those. Where DEA called me one time. I was on shift, and they're like, "Hey, we have a black SUV coming in. They got a load. We need you to pull them over." I had to pull PC on it. I found the vehicle. They ran a stop sign. They had 30, 40 kilos of cocaine. Guy ran from me, 18, 19 years old, tried to hit a couple of Border Patrol agents and hit a trooper. Like 2 or 3 troopers swerved at him. And I mean, the dude went to prison for 50 years or something like that. 19 at the time, ruined his life, for nothing. And so, but all in all, so you think that this case here with Bryan Kohberger is pretty solid. You think it's going to start on time? I know there's been a lot of stall tactics. You think there's going to be more stalling?
I'll be shocked. Let's say surprised if it starts on time. I just really don't think it will. But I want it to. And Judge Hippler is giving all of us, I think, a lot of hope. He decides things quickly. Nothing like Judge, which was the other judge, right? Judge John Judge, which I think is a perfect name. I think if my last name were Judge, I might try to be a judge. Right. It's just a cool name. But he would let Ann Taylor drone on and on and on ad nauseum. He would let her put 3 witnesses on for the IGG in the first go around. Even one was like a botany expert or a botanist, and nobody was even trained in IGG. And I don't know if you remember, one of the witnesses said, "Oh my gosh, I'm pulling back. I didn't even sign what they said I signed." I don't know if you remember all this, but basically this judge is reining it in. He gives set amount of time. We're going to discuss this. He calls Ann Taylor on the carpet. He does it all the time. What he say, no matter what you're arguing, this was so funny when he said this, the DNA on that chief below Maddie Mogen is probable cause every day of the week and twice on Sunday. Don't quote me exactly, but that was the inference. And it was so great to see somebody actually push back on the shenanigans. And that gives me hope that it's more possible than I initially thought, that it could start on time.
Yeah, I'm really hoping it does. I think it's been stalled out enough. It's obviously a tactic of the defense. In the bushy eyebrows document that they just dropped, they reference the time that it's already been and how long it's been since Dylan has seen the intruder. And they're only adding to that, that length of time that it is between the time that she's seen the intruder to the time that she's going to testify. And so it's definitely a defense tactic to stall as much as possible. It definitely appears that they're trying to do so every time there's something that's due. It seems like on the eve of the deadline, there's an ask to extend it. Constantly doing that. It's just it's pretty crazy. What are there any parts of this case that worry you though?
From the beginning, I didn't like that the FBI expert mischaracterized the year of the car, even though I think it's very easy to explain. If you look at the Hyundai Elantra and you look at a 15, you can't tell a 15 from a 13, from an 11. You really can't. I one time posted them on my Twitter, which would switch. It's so hard to tell because there were such minor features. But I don't like that he had 30 years on the job and he didn't know to make that range longer, considering how close they looked alike, and that you're working with video footage that wasn't the best, right? So I just kind of don't like that as far as, I mean, I think the car is very important and I think they have enough that it's not going to be a huge issue. But anytime you can, dig just a little bit here and a little bit there, I never like that. I don't like the fact that the Moscow, Idaho individual that handled some of the cell records, I don't know if you remember this, but he left some of the records in his drawer and was turned over a little later. And he said, you know what? I'm an idiot. I just left it. I mean, words to this effect, right? I left it in my drawer. It was nothing nefarious. It's just records, but it should have been in this, but the problem is, and you see this in all these cases, right? When you can't attack the facts because they're so strong, you attack the people and you attack the investigation and you start just throwing these little, scuds out. I just don't like a jury wondering, well, geez, that FBI agent was wrong and that guy shouldn't have left those records in there. And you start, people start not looking at the facts anymore, but looking at the distraction.
Gotcha. Well, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. I forgot about those cell records stuck in the drawer. That was a while ago. The other day I was going, and they've changed it now, the layout there on the Idaho website, but I was showing the difference between the Bryan Kohberger case and the other cases in Idaho as far as how many documents there are. Holy smokes. It is insane. We got a couple questions from some folks here. First and foremost, Sirius says, what an amazing guest tonight. Please go sub up to Miss Goffender's channel, fangirling tonight. And so thank you. We also have a admirer saying that you're attractive. And we have another person with a 999 coming in saying small cash for being wounded, unavailable for work. Appreciate that. But the question, I got bit by a dog, a real dog, not like the John, the Karen Reed.
Reach.
I actually got bit by a real dog. I have like loss of movement in my left hand. I'm getting better, but it was it's been a little bit of a moment here. But yeah, my bite and my brother, man, we just have some bad luck. My brother about 6-7 months ago got bit by a female German Shepherd. One time, just she bit. He worked sales and he was inside of a house doing a job. And a guy came home, forgot he was there, and let the dog out. And the dog came, bit him in the arm, and then let him go. Nothing. I mean, and I tell everybody here on the case, because we've talked about the Karen Reed case as well. I was like, man, to believe the theory, we would have to believe that John O'Keefe had a dog attached to his arm while he was defending people with one arm, and this dog didn't have any front paws because he didn't get any scratches, or he only had one paw, one jaw, because I got bit once. My brother got bit by it once, and both of us had scratches from both paws on both sides of us and everything else in between. No way that was a dog. No way it's a dog.
No way. And so superficial. Oh, that case. That case, I always feel like this case is real detective work here. The people that follow this case, I think for the most part, are very well educated. They really care. They really want to learn. They have great questions. You know what I mean? It's such a great audience that follows the Bryan Kohberger case, or I shouldn't say that, the Idaho 4 case. Bryan Kohberger is the suspect. You look at that, John O'Keefe case with Karen Reed, and I just need a shower every time I talk about that case because it's so slimy. The lawyers are slime. The defendant is slime. The people that are running around in pink shirts and the bloggers and I just, ugh.
Yeah.
That's one pigsty, that case.
Yeah, I just started looking into it. I didn't see it the first trial. I really didn't look into a lot of it. I honestly went into it. I had seen a lot of the folks that were the mob right outside and harassing folks. So I didn't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. I was like, I don't want to be a part of this. I'd seen some pictures. I really didn't look into anything. And it really did appear from the pictures that I had seen that the tail light looked kind of fishy. And so when I went into it, I actually thought that maybe there was something to this conspiracy, but I didn't want to add to it because I didn't want to be a part of that mob. But then I looked into it. People kept telling me, just look into it. You have an eye for these things. You can point out things. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to look into just the facts. I'm not going to look into the case. I'm just going to look into the evidence that's out there. And I just saw the pictures of the arm. I saw the video of her backing out and how it's already missing a piece of tail light. And when I saw that, I was like, look, it's 5 something in the morning. Her vehicle was in a garage. It was protected from the elements. You can already see a big chunk of it is missing. Supposedly she hit John's car here, but yet there's nothing on the ground. I mean, you would see red on the white snow there, and there's nothing there. If something large, fell down, there's nothing there. So obviously, wherever this vehicle came from last is where where it got hit. And to me, it's been obvious of what occurred. But and not to mention, also, I found some video of the attorneys mentioning something to the effect that in the beginning that this was an accident and that there was no intent, not necessarily that she wasn't involved. So I was like, everything in there, she's admitted to it. There's a lot of things. Now I get that there's some remarks from a trooper there that is pretty bad, but I'll be 110% honest with you. I arrested a guy who had assaulted his daughter and his stepdaughter, and I had some choice words. If people went through my phone after I arrested him, and the things I said about that guy, would have made Proctor look like a saint. I'll be honest with you. So I mean, I don't get it. I don't understand it. But I guess controversy sells.
That's exactly right, and it might get her off, not because she's not factually guilty, but because of jury nullification, just like with OJ.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Hopefully we'll see what happens. In the second time around. I think that the prosecution is better set up this time. I've who was it? One of these attorneys that I've seen mention that the second time around is usually not as beneficial to the defense as it was the first time, especially now that the prosecution has an idea of how the defense is going to attack the information. So we'll see how this one goes around. Virginia, though, asks, back to the Bryan Kohberger case, do you think prosecution could have the K-bar by this point?
No, I don't think the K-bar has been recovered, and I don't think his bloody clothing have been recovered. Any plastic bags, anything he used. I'm convinced that he buried it or burned it someplace way out there. This area is so remote for anybody who's been in this area of the country. Mm-hmm. And I think it's going to take luck for some camper, some dog, something that would find it. What do you think?
I think it's been moved a few times. And I don't think they have it now. I hope they find it. But he from when he left to where his phone turned off, there's a good 18 minutes there that's unaccounted, right? And the following day, when he's leaving Clarkston, Washington, and he's heading back home, he turns his phone off in around the Johnson, Washington area. And again, the PCA describes that he goes into that area that he was in, the night before when this phone turned off. And then he's out there for 5 hours. So that's going to be huge, right? Like, what was he doing out there for 5 hours that time? Obviously, I think he went to go pick up whatever kit he may have had. I would have assumed he buried it. I wonder if he picked it back up and maybe put it elsewhere along his trip. He took an odd trip back home through Colorado and stuff. I have my thoughts on that. Why do you think he took that trip? Do you think it was just merely because of the snow?
Oh, no. I think it was very well planned. I think that, first of all, I think he was very paranoid. Mm-hmm. And he had to really be paranoid once he got pulled over twice.
Yeah.
He must have just been going, oh my gosh, see, I told you, you're not paranoid if they're really watching you, right? And but I do believe that something probably nefarious happened in terms of getting rid of evidence during that trip.
Yeah, I wouldn't have been surprised. There's one thing that bothered me about this case, or not so much bothered me, but like that I picked up on is there's a lot of like resemblance to Ted Bundy, and the sorority house, his age, then he goes to Colorado, kind of the same thing as Ted Bundy did. But according to his alibi, he claims he was in the Walleye Park where Joyce LePage, who a lot of people say isn't Ted Bundy's first victim. I don't think that's important. A lot of people thought that may have been Ted Bundy's first victim. And what's important, in my opinion, is did Bryan Kohberger think that there was that possibility? And if it was, what do you think about the fact that his alibi for the night that four homicides happened. He's claiming to be in the one place where Ted Bundy dumped his first victim. A person that he studied in DeSales University. Do you see any weird coincidence there?
I think that you bring up such a great point. And I have to say, because I'm interviewed a lot about this case in mainstream and in social, and I love that you know all these intricacies because I know exactly what you're talking about. I did this whole tweet on this very thing that you're talking about. And no, I actually don't think she was Bundy's victim, but a lot of people still think she was. And could Kohberger, I just don't think that is, I think it's not a coincidence. I think I agree with you that it's just too coincidental. And that could have been the reason, he was there, chose there to stargaze and moon gaze.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. I honestly think he would have had to have known about that unsolved, murder, and to even at that, to say that that's where he was at a big unsolved case. That's where the body was found, and that's where he's claiming to be. I thought, and I said this a long time ago, is he paying homage to Bundy? I mean, he went from there, he went to the Grand Tetons, and then he went through Colorado, just the same similar path. Now, obviously, he went. Bryan Kohberger then turned upwards towards Pennsylvania, but you're absolutely right. He was extremely paranoid. Maybe that's the reason why he went down that way, to try to lose them, maybe destroy more evidence. Maybe he had, I think that could have been a big situation, is because if he didn't have any evidence left with him, what difference would it have mattered if he got pulled over? So that was interesting. What do you think about the way they arrested him and they got into his house? I have no problems with it. You have a person who's a homicide suspect, quadruple homicide suspect. I get it that initially they thought maybe they were going to knock at the door and announce themselves, but you see him moving around inside of the house. I have no problems with the no knock. What are your thoughts on the way they arrested him?
This is a no-brainer. Now, remember, I'm coming from a tactical background, right? For 15 years. So this is a no-brainer. You've got a quadruple homicide suspect. You have a house where there's more occupants than just him, so he could take somebody as a hostage or otherwise hurt them. You have a residential area. You've already got permission from the judge to hit before 6 a.m. This was, in my opinion, always planned as a rake and break. We're going to breach. We're getting in there and we're putting hands on, especially when they saw, as I recall, he was awake and, sorting through things with the plastic. You have to go in there. He could run and then you have a hot mess. In other words, speed, surprise, violence of action, get in there, get your hands on him before he even knows what happened. And that's what they did. And that's what they should have done. I feel very staunchly about that.
Yeah, I do too. What about the thought that his vehicle has been stored the entire time that he was up there in Pennsylvania? His vehicle was stored in that garage. You think his father may have known something? I mean, it's not like his car was like a Corvette or something that you want to keep out of the snow. I mean, he's coming from Idaho in a Hyundai Elantra. It's a weird thing to all right, let's put our son's Hyundai Elantra in the garage and protect that.
Oh, I think the parents had an inkling, and certainly the sisters had an inkling. I really do. I think that may come out. Recall they were, both of the parents were called to testify before a grand jury in another jurisdiction regarding an unsolved murder.
Dana Smithers. Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Yeah. See, you're all over this. And I thought that was very interesting because, they fought that. They don't have that much money. I believe they've gone through at least one bankruptcy, and they've got attorneys to represent them. They fought that tooth and nail. And what was there really to fight? He was never indicted. It wasn't even his MO. It did not seem probable, but they didn't want to be on the stand because of reciprocal grand jury that Idaho could get from what the Kohbergers could say.
Yeah.
So, it was a brilliant move to call him in just for that piece. People might think that's unfair, but that was the play. And I just thought that told me a lot, because I feel like they felt they did know a lot of information, and now they were going to have to tell a grand jury about it, just about his, movements and things.
Interesting. Interesting. It's a good tactic to figure out some things about him. I know that they mentioned in their statement that they've released, in their one and only statement, that they have fully cooperated with law enforcement. Do you think anybody has actually spoken against Bryan Kohberger from that family?
I think possibly one of the sisters.
Mm-hmm.
We'll see. But, I mean, dating back, and this really doesn't have much to do with the price of tea in China, as my mom used to say. But do you remember when I think he stole a cell phone from one of the sisters?
Yes,
Remember?
ma'am. 2014.
Yep. And do you remember the father getting involved and getting Kohberger in trouble for that? He didn't just sit back and let it ride, right? So all I'm saying on that is I think they knew they had a troubled young man for a long time. And I think one of the sisters that was interviewed was probably very honest with her concerns. I think that may come out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so too. That's been long rumored that one of the sisters may have spoken about something, whether it was the amount of times that he was cleaning the vehicle in the garage or the unusual behaviors. I don't think we saw Bryan Kohberger wearing gloves and things like that when he was getting pulled over. I think there was gloves in his lap, but they weren't the nitrate gloves that he'd been rumored to be wearing in grocery stores and at his house and things of that nature. I think that's kind of an obvious tell, right? All of a sudden, this quadruple homicide happened. Now he's wearing these gloves around everywhere, change in behavior. I just, there's so much there, in my opinion. I can't wait for trial to start. I think we're going to find out a lot of stuff about this house, about this guy and the house.
I agree. And one of the things I did want to mention is I'm still sick about that house. I don't know how you feel about that. House never should have been torn down, ever, ever, ever. And again, I'll die on the cross for that one too, because that was a poor move. I understand the prosecution didn't seem to mind. The defense certainly didn't want to walk through in that house of horrors.
Mm-hmm.
But I thought that was a huge error.
I thought so too. And I was just about to bring that up. I'm glad you did. Personally, I thought it was a mistake. I'd been saying it beforehand. I was like, how powerful is it going to be for, the jury that's going to be walking up those stairs? And then when they demolished it, I noticed that there wasn't any stairs. And I noticed that there was so much that was taken out of inside of that house for processing. It was probably going to be impossible to put anybody in there anyways.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a really great point, but I look at something that a lot of your audience might know about because they're true crimers is the Murdaugh case. How important it was that those jurors went down and saw just the trajectory and how it would have worked where Murdaugh was versus Pawpaw versus his wife and the shooting. I think for me, the reason that house was important is, and I understand some of the things were missing, but how you go into a house that you see online to maybe purchase it or rent it or whatever, and it's so different. And then you get there and you say, wait a minute, the ceilings are only this tall. And oh my gosh, the stairs are right there. And, it just, to be in a house like that, it speaks 1,000 words. In other words, as the right next door to the house, there was a Ring camera audio. Wouldn't it be great to be a juror and be able to be in that house and see if I could hear the other jurors outside, just kind of like that, just to get the feel or peeking around a corner that Dylan would have done. What all could she have seen? I know they're going to have all this fancy, video stuff, whatever, mumbo jumbo. There's nothing like being in the house, being at the crime scene. That's just my opinion.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, there's also the aspect of what you can see from outside. I mean, if you parked in the back of that house, what can you see through that window? Who can you see from the windows? It might give you an idea of who may be in the target. If you can park back there and all you can see is Maddie's bedroom from the parking lot there, and factor in the fact that that's the direct line of travel that Bryan Kohberger may have taken or allegedly taken that night, it leads you to believe that maybe that could give you an idea of why he chose that house, who may have been the target, things of that nature. Exactly, 100%. You're 100% right. Yeah, I was completely against it being demolished, regardless if they could have gone in or out. But like I said, I mean, going inside, I wasn't sure they were going to be able to do so. It seems like they're going to bring in a model for, but it's a small one. It's not one that anybody's going to be able to walk into. You know, I don't think it's going to be as powerful, but it's going to talk about the direction of travel. You know, there's one thing that I think the defense is going to try to do. I think that the defense is going to try to make it seem like Bryan Kohberger went down, or the intruder went down through the first floor and out the first door. There's been rumors about Bethany seeing somebody undressed outside of the house. There's blood on the handrail. If I was the defense team, I would try to say, hey, the intruder could have been the guy that, you know, what Dylan saw was not reliable. The intruder went down the first floor. That's why his blood is on the handrail. Bethany saw somebody running out with potentially without clothing. Do you think that that might come up? Do you think that there's anything to that by any chance?
I was really looking into the whole Bethany, all that rumor, you know, had some sort of vacuum and they were naked. I just don't see any of that. I really believe he had on two outfits, if you will, and slinked one off. And I think he had a plastic bag there to put everything in. He had plenty of time. I know people think, oh, he didn't have enough time. He only had, 6 minutes or so, 6 to 8 minutes. That's an eternity, as you know. I mean, honestly, he could have ran over 1.5 miles in 8 minutes. No, sorry, over a mile. He ran 6-minute miles. Think about that, running a mile. And he's just going upstairs, stabbing a few people, even though it would be exhaustive, right? Especially exhaustive because this is cathartic for him. You know, this would have been like, you know, hallelujah. And, but it still would have been work, but it wouldn't have taken much time. He had a K-bar knife and they were asleep and or groggy and drunk.
Yeah, exactly. I've told that to so many folks. And I think that you can kind of, with the pictures that they have and the Linda Lane footage, you know, you can see that the vehicle goes around. I think the last time when it's heading out there, it's just around 4:07 a.m. And now we have a picture at 4:20 and some change. And so you have about 13 minutes. Give them, you know, 2-3 minutes to change in and out of clothing, getting in and out of the house, which is a lot of time. You know, 2-3 minutes is a lot of time to do those things. I mean, it shouldn't take merely just a few seconds to take off a jumpsuit, to be honest with you. You know, and that's what is suspected that he had purchased. I think he had the tag and the receipt at his apartment. What do you think about that? The tag and the receipt. And at first I thought it was the tag, like the purchasing tag, but Howard Bloom made it seem like it was the tag, like the tag and the collar. What do you think about that?
You know, it doesn't surprise me because I do believe that people that commit these crimes, they do like souvenirs. They don't want to give everything up. I think he was very cocky, and I don't think he thought he was ever going to get caught. And so they take risks. They're risk takers. I mean, going into a house with multiple people with a K-bar knife is risky. And that's part of the excitement of it all. And so I'm not surprised.
Yeah, I'm not either. I know somebody had mentioned something about perhaps if you had the tag, you can trace it down to where it was purchased. But I have never heard that before. I was wondering if you knew anything about that.
I don't think so. I think a lot of times, as you know, people kind of think that this is, you know, television. We can magically like, oh yeah, this tag is going to go to the Target on 5th Street down in downtown Philly. No, it's not. We wish it would. But obviously, I think that that's not going to be that relevant. That tag, whatever it is going to tell us exactly what he purchased.
Yeah, apparently he purchased it a couple of days before. From what I've heard, it's not out there yet, but from the rumors that I've heard, I think he purchased it from a local store just a few days earlier, prior to the crime. And you know, kind of goes back to that April 22nd potential purchase of the knife. And I'm not sure if I asked you this earlier, and I want to ask again just to get clarification, but him purchasing that knife so much earlier than before he even moved, does that tell you that he had planned on doing this to someone? It doesn't necessarily mean Maddie or Kaylee and that, but that his intention prior to even leaving and moving to Moscow, that he was going to commit a crime like this.
He'd been fantasizing, my belief is, for well longer than April. He fantasized, he couldn't wait to do something like this. This is something that was in his head for such a long time. And I can just picture him on his sofa playing with that knife. As you know, K-bar knives, they have the toughest snaps, all these very, knives that are very deadly like this. This is like the knives we carried in SWAT. And that snap is difficult on purpose because you never want it not to be snapped and you reach down and you slice off your finger. So I can just picture him, though, the excitement of practicing with it. There is no way I think he unsnapped that there, just to be clear with everybody. This was from practicing. Trust me, he had that knife out and ready to roll, and he was gloved. This from before all those times, just and I also think this was so sexual, but for, a lot of things going wrong in his book, Ethan being there. I don't think he had it under surveillance to know who, that Ethan was going to be there. I don't think he necessarily even knew that Kaylee was going to be there. Remember, she had a different car than other times when he would have been there because she had just purchased that car. Yeah. And I mean, I certainly think that his hope was to sexually assault Maddie. 100%. This is a sexual crime. There's no way it's not a sexual crime, in my opinion. It just didn't get carried out as he had fantasized.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, and when it comes to those type of crimes as well, the nature of committing those crimes is the nature behind it, the sexual nature. The self-gratification usually comes later, and with the memory and stuff like that. It's disgusting, disturbing people that are associated with this, and which reminds me of do you think that the Reddit folks that he was talking to are going to come forward? Because my thing is, we find out now, or we found out earlier in some of the I guess writings he had, that he had a lack of remorse and feelings. Right now, the prosecutor or the defense is trying to throw out the autism stuff. In my opinion, that they're putting it out there like that as autism because they don't. And they also throw out a document. They don't want him to be called a sociopath or a psychopath. In my opinion, that's because he probably falls in those lines, and they want to keep it under the spectrum of autism, right? It's probably less detrimental to them if you're calling them a subject of somebody who's on the spectrum versus a psychopath or a sociopath. Just kind of to the ears of the jury and those that are listening into this. That comes out again. He's talking to some folks on Reddit. I'm assuming those are also ex-cons that have committed violent crimes. There's probably some connections being made. They're like, hey, I feel this way. I understand how you're feeling, yada, yada, yada. And had that, kind of go up there and be a commonality for him and be part of that increased urge that he ended up following through on. Do you think we're going to hear from any of the folks that he spoke with on Reddit?
I doubt it. I mean, if I were involved in the prosecution, I think they should keep this very much in their lane to the facts and show the crime and all the facts that lead one to believe it was Bryan Kohberger. I think when you start getting into, I think motive is important. The jury's going to want to hear motive. I think the motive for me is simple. I think he's an incel. I think he, hated with a passion, and because he could never have them, and they were so far out of his reach. The beautiful, cutesy, sorority type girl that lights up the room, that he was never going to have. And I feel that is the motive behind the crime. But will they be able to portray that without using the Reddit writings? I think just with the Reddit writings, they could prove a lot regarding motive. But I don't think they'll call anybody. I think they have to be very careful because it's going to be a long trial to keep that jury honed in on these big facts. Yeah.
No, I hear you. I thought that, those writings are definitely going to be huge. You make an excellent point. Stick to the facts. Don't go into the other stuff there. Unless he confessed to one of these guys. or said something that was eerily similar to what ended up happening. If he made a comment of some sort, I think maybe that might be used. But unless that's there, unless it's just, if it's just conversation going back and forth, then probably not. What about these individuals who are on like Inside Looking or Papa Rogers? Bryan Kohberger, could that have been some sort of modern way of inserting himself into the crime by being on these social media platforms talking about it?
Well, I got to tell you, especially with both of those accounts, but particularly Papa Roger, I mean, about every week I would take one of what Papa Roger said and show how it related to the crime. I thought if it ended up being Bryan Kohberger, that he was Papa Roger, I was just, I thought it was unbelievable, because you look at so many people. I'll take BTK, right? He wrote the Wichita Eagle and Beacon. He was constantly reaching out to Cake TV and saying, look at what I did, and, signed BTK. Remember, he named himself Bind, Torture, and Kill, not anybody else, right? Because these sorts of murders, and I equate him very closely to a BTK because he was in control in terms of his planning, and he was this wasn't haphazard like a BTK. And I think he surveilled. BTK also surveilled well before he hit his targets. So I really do think that Papa Roger mimicked, but after BTK was put in jail, there was a lot on social media indicating that there were other posts from Papa Roger, I think two, that, people who, which I'm not, seemed to say they could somehow trace the origin, saying, see, Papa Roger isn't Kohberger, because look, they're still posting. I don't know what I really believe, when it comes to AI and when it comes to some of this digital, unless an expert tells me, and even then, I'm hesitant. I don't know, but boy, I tell you, I was fascinated by the Papa Roger, thinking it's him. Wow. And, Dateline, when I interviewed with them, and again, they already knew about the knife sheath, they were very convinced and said through inside sources that Papa Roger was Bryan Kohberger.
Oh, wow.
So, see, I know. So we'll see. I remember them interviewing me, and I had a very similar answer that I gave here, but they think they said that. And I can't wait to see that piece of it.
Yeah, that'd be interesting, because there was some stuff that was that was interesting about it. And one of the posts that was out afterwards was something about him catching some fish, and that was being spread around. That was a screenshot that somebody had taken. I had seen it. I don't know. I didn't see the profile, but I saw the screenshot. But anybody could have created that screenshot. Anybody could have created it, the date on it, or whatever the case may have been. But if they think that was him, then that's crazy, because there was some things that was said in there that were only things that maybe perhaps the killer may have known. I thought maybe he was just somebody who was just super sensitive to details or something like that. But if they have some sources behind that would be interesting. That would be interesting.
Yeah, it's one of my biggest questions. It shouldn't be. But I feel like the evidence is very strong that it's Bryan Kohberger. And I think there's only going to be, more information supporting that. But dang it, I want to know if that's Papa Roger.
Yeah, I do too. And it is weird that they do have a resemblance. The photo from Papa Roger and Bryan Kohberger, it's pretty close.
100%. There is so many. I probably did 50 tweets on, everything from him talking about a sheath before any of us knew that there was a sheath left. Too many to list that were resemblances, not only in what was said, but certainly how he looked. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, because there could be many reasons why somebody would have thought that law enforcement had an idea of the type of knife that they were looking for. I mean, the knife could have broken. I mean, there's 4 victims. You would expect the knife to, it would be, I don't think anybody would have been surprised if the knife had broken.
Except for the K-bar. Man,
Mm-hmm.
K-bars are built like, they're the,
Yeah.
I don't know, Rolls Royce of a knife.
Yeah, no, they're pretty tough. I mean, they were issued out by the military for a reason. You know, so about the car, how surprised were you that there was no DNA in the car from any of the victims?
I got to tell you, I was super, super surprised. At the time I said that, if he went in there bloody, it's going to be a treasure trove because, blood seeps into the little crevices and they're going to find it, right?
Mm-hmm.
What I did not anticipate when I said that a long time ago was he's brilliant. He thought about, I think, bagging his clothes. And he didn't go in there with a lot of blood. And I think he probably cleaned that car a dozen times. And he wasn't dripping with blood. That's the bottom line. And
Right.
I think most pundits who talked about that, I don't know where you stood on that, but oh my gosh, I thought there would be, but I assumed he went in the car bloody. Now I think he stripped everything down, put it in a plastic bag, put it in the trunk that was also lined with plastic. Ta-da!
Yeah. Yeah. With me, I was surprised. I thought I wasn't shocked, but I was surprised a little bit. When it came out that they had Bryan Kohberger threw DNA off of a knife sheath, that immediately told me that there wasn't any single source DNA, at least under a fingernail or blood or hair or any of those things left at the scene. That this was the strongest piece of evidence that could point in the direction of the intruder as far as DNA goes. Because if they had those things, if they had pulled hair out of, a victim's hand or something of that nature, well, that tells a lot. That's a stronger piece of evidence. And that's definitely what you're going to use instead of touch DNA. So for me, for somebody to go into a house and commit a quadruple homicide in close proximity using a knife and be exertive and have to go through all that and not be given a chance to clean up and those type of things and leave little DNA, so little that had he not left the sheath behind, he probably wouldn't have gotten caught. That tells me the planning didn't stop at the door there. He must have planned the car. It was probably dextered out, just the fact of the trip that he took to Pullman, just so that he would be out of the scope of the investigation of where they would be looking at the cameras of vehicles entering into Pullman, given the time frame of which when the murders occurred, all those things. So much planning, and he had 7 weeks. I mean, if he was able to get away with that with no time, 4 murders, 4 people with a knife, 7 weeks with his car, I had no doubt that he was going to be able to clean it.
Yeah. Yeah. Such good points. But I did want to say this. I always noticed in the defense papers, remember when they came out and the prosecution was so mad, they said, you're giving information, you're basically violating the order, the protective order, when they said, as an example, as you just pointed out, no DNA in the car, no DNA in his office, no DNA in his apartment, right? No DNA of the kids, meaning, or at the house in Pennsylvania. But one thing they didn't say, and this has always stuck with me, they never included in there, and no DNA at 1122 King Road.
That's interesting.
They don't say that. And I think if they could have, they would have. And no other DNA other than the knife sheath at 1122. So I have always thought, and maybe, the fingernails of Maddie is going to be some percentage that it's his, right? Whether that gets in or not, we'll see. But I don't know if we're done yet with possible DNA. Remember, we also have the van's footprint that could only be uncovered via amino acid tests, which basically a blood type test, right. And that's also very interesting to me.
Yeah, that one's weird because there's nothing leading up to it. From what I read from the documents, the way the defense makes it perceived. Again, this is the defense's perception of it, so take that with a grain of salt. They make it seem like there's nothing leading up to that step, like that step is all alone. How do you explain that?
Well, I've thought that was interesting, but remember, you couldn't even see that shoe print other than them doing these specialized tests. And if he stepped in blood, you could step in blood with just one shoe and not the other.
Right.
It also have been, I mean, that's what I think. I think he changed shoes though, too.
Yeah, no, I for sure think he changed shoes as well. Maybe they just, like you said, it was probably barely visible. Maybe they only checked that one spot at that point. But yeah, no, I definitely thought that was the case. One of the things that I read in a couple of the documents and a few documents ago was that there may be a fingerprint expert on the prosecution side. Have you heard anything about any fingerprints found at this scene? I know that they mentioned here recently about where the DNA or the swabbing happened wasn't on the back part of the sheath because that was the best place to find a fingerprint. You think they found a print by any chance?
Oh, I think it's very possible. I know he was gloved though. So I'm going to say it wouldn't surprise me. And I'll tell you why. Because as I said, that DNA was not left during this crime. It was
Right.
from earlier on when he was playing with that thumb snap. And so could he have left fingerprints on that sheath as well when he was fiddling with it, when
Yeah.
he was not gloved at home?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking too. That was the first thing that came to my mind. I was like, hey, well, what's the one thing we know he touched? The knife sheath. So, is it possible that there's some fingerprints there? I know that leather, although maybe not the easiest, but can leave some fingerprints behind as well. But yeah, I want to thank you. Do you have any questions for me? I've been covering this case wholeheartedly since it started. I know a lot of the ins and the outs about it. I have, I've tried to keep track of everything and read almost every document. Do you have any questions for me by any chance or anything?
I am so glad I came on your show.
I appreciate that.
I think it's great to, for law enforcement, former law enforcement people to, support each other. And, I can really tell you've done your homework and been in on this case from the beginning. And it's so refreshing. And I really am glad we've intersected this way. And I hope we continue to intersect and you keep continuing to do your work.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. I appreciate that. Yes, I initially the show was not going to be true crime. That's why Drunk Turkey had nothing to do with that. Me and the guys, I had some buddies of mine who were interested in doing a podcast. We were going to talk about aliens and UFOs. Maybe I'll bring you on about Area 51 if you know anything. That was the plan. And then Richard Allen got arrested, and I had been aware of that case since it happened. I wasn't really like following it really hardcore, but I had been aware of it. And I thought that there was an arrest with Anthony Schatz. I thought something had happened. I'd forgotten about it. Then he got arrested and I was like, whoa, what's going on here? And, I started looking into it, and we started talking about it, and we started talking about certain things. And, I have an eye for details, and I brought up the bridge guy, and I was like pointing out some things. And I was like, look, this guy's small. Like the guy walking on this bridge is small. I was like, look at the pants. Look at where the knee is. It's below the kneecap. You see the pants folded upward. The arms, the sleeves on the arms are all scrunched up. The shirt is leaning out of underneath. This is Indiana, a small town in Indiana. So he's not getting tailored clothes. He's just going to have to deal with what's out there. And so if he's a pudgy guy, he's going to have to deal with clothes that's a lot longer than what, his body is for his height. And this guy's small, like easy. This is not Ron Logan. I mean, if this was Ron Logan, he'd have other problems, with the arms and the sleeves and stuff like that. And that kind of got us and propelled us. And then Bryan Kohberger case happened. And I'm an ex-law enforcement. My buddy was, he's a paramedic and in the medical field as well. And my other buddy was just infatuated with serial killers. And so like, it became kind of natural to talk about true crime. And so we weren't initially. That's kind of why I changed the title a little bit to the DT show, just to kind of incorporate that. We're a little bit different now.
Well, thanks again for having me, and hopefully your audience might want to check out my channel, Break the Case with Jen Coffindaffer. We talk about lots of different crimes and missing kids, and then also there, and then there's my Twitter, right? Nope, that's the Break the Case. See, I don't have my glasses on. And then my Twitter is at Coffindaffer FBI, and I do just a lot on crime, 5 or 6 tweets a day, and we keep it going, man. I tell you, I have a lot of haters, but mostly everybody's nice on there. Mostly.
Oh, I hear you. I've had my fair share. I'm not on the, I guess on the bandwagon in a couple of different cases. And so I get it. I get a little bit of the force there too. But here is Miss Kohberger's YouTube channel. Make sure you go check out, like, and subscribe. Let her know that we sent you guys. It's also in the description on the show. Thank you again. And again, I can't wait to have you back on the show. There's so many other cases I want to talk to you about. Karen Reed is one, Richard Allen another, and so many more. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you. And until next time, justice be served. Bye,
Yes,
y'all.
ma'am. Bye. And there you go, guys. And that was Jennifer Kohberger, FBI agent, former FBI agent. She comes out on a couple of different channels. I've seen her on Yellow Cottage Tales. I've seen her on, I think, 12 Gauge. She was on 12 Gauge's channel not too long ago. She talks about a lot of different true crime. I've been following her on X and on YouTube. The Sebastian Rogers case is another one that she's spoken highly about. A lot of good stuff, guys. Make sure you go and check her out. But that's going to do it for me tonight, guys. I'll be back probably, what is tonight, Wednesday, maybe Friday night. I'll be back. If you guys have, please hit that like button, subscribe, ring that notification bell, do the whole 9 yards. Remember, guys, I've been getting it a lot here lately that I'm not getting notified of the lives, and nobody's telling me about the lives. If you hit the like button, that tells the YouTubes, or if you hit the share button, or if you repost this on X. I know a lot of our followers right now are on X. I want to thank you guys. Repost this, share, follow, please. That'll get everything going. I'm trying to get this channel moving in the right direction and all platforms. So I'd appreciate all that. You guys have a great night. And until next time, peace.